which leads to the realization of ultimate truth. Apart from those we have discussed here, there are many other subjects of meditation, traditionally 40 in number, among which mention should be made particularly of the four sublime states. Brahmavihara. 1. Extending unlimited universal love and goodwill, metta, to all living beings without any kind of discrimination, just as a mother loves her only child. 2. Compassion, karuna, for all living beings who are suffering, in trouble and affliction. 3. Sympathetic joy, mudita, in others' success, welfare, and happiness. And 4. Equanimity, upekkha, in all vicissitudes of life. End of chapter 7. What the Buddha Taught by Walpola Raula. Chapter 8. What the Buddha Taught and the World Today. There are some who believe that Buddhism is so lofty and sublime a system that it cannot be practiced by ordinary men and women in this workaday world of ours, and that one has to retire from it to a monastery or to some quiet place if one desires to be a true Buddhist. This is a sad misconception, due evidently to a lack of understanding of the teaching of the Buddha. People run to such hasty and wrong conclusions as a result of their hearing, or reading casually, something about Buddhism written by someone who, as he has not understood the subject in all its aspects, gives only a partial and lopsided view of it. The Buddha's teaching is meant not only for monks in monasteries, but also for ordinary men and women living at home with their families. The Noble Eightfold Path, which is the Buddhist way of life, is meant for all, without distinction of any kind. The vast majority of people in the world cannot turn monk, or retire into caves or forests. However noble and pure Buddhism may be, it would be useless to the masses of mankind if they could not follow it in their daily life in the world of today. But if you understand the spirit of Buddhism correctly, and not only its letter, you can surely follow and practice it while living the life of an ordinary man. There may be some who find it easier and more convenient to accept Buddhism if they do live in a remote place, cut off from the society of others. Others may find that kind of retirement dulls and depresses their whole being, both physically and mentally, and that it may not therefore be conducive to the development of their spiritual and intellectual life. True renunciation does not mean running away physically from the world. Sariputta, the chief disciple of the Buddha, said that one man might live in a forest devoting himself to ascetic practices, but might be full of impure thoughts and defilements. Another might live in a village or a town, practicing no ascetic discipline, but his mind might be pure and free from defilements. Of these two, said Sariputta, the one who lives a pure life in the village or town is definitely far superior to, and greater than, the one who lives in the forest. The common belief that to follow the Buddha's teaching one has to retire from life is a misconception. It is really an unconscious defense against practicing it. There are numerous references in Buddhist literature to men and women living ordinary, normal family lives who successfully practiced what the Buddha taught and realized nirvana. Bhakagota the Wanderer, whom we met earlier in the chapter on anatta, once asked the Buddha straightforwardly whether there were laymen and women leading the family life who followed his teaching successfully and attained to high spiritual states. The Buddha categorically stated that there were not one or two, not 100 or 200 or 500, but many more laymen and women leading the family life who followed his teaching successfully and attained to high spiritual states. It may be agreeable for certain people to live a retired life in a quiet place, away from noise and disturbance. But it is certainly more praiseworthy and courageous to practice Buddhism living among your fellow beings, helping them and being of service to them. It may, perhaps, be useful in some cases for a man to live in retirement for a time in order to improve his mind and character, as preliminary moral, spiritual, and intellectual training, to be strong enough to come out later and help others. But if a man lives all his life in solitude, thinking only of his own happiness and salvation, without caring for his fellows, this surely is not in keeping with the Buddha's teaching, which is based on love, compassion, and service to others. One might now ask, if a man can follow Buddhism while living the life of an ordinary layman, why was the Sangha, the order of monks, established by the Buddha? The order provides opportunity for those who are willing to devote their lives, not only to their own spiritual and intellectual development, but also to the service of others. An ordinary layman with a family cannot be expected to devote his whole life to the service of others, whereas a monk, who has no family responsibilities or any other worldly ties, is in a position to devote his whole life for the good of the many, for the happiness of the many, according to the Buddha's advice. That is how, in the course of history, the Buddhist monastery became not only a spiritual center, but also a center of learning and culture. The Sigala Sutta, number 31 of the Digha Nikaya, shows with what great respect the layman's life, his family, and social relations are regarded by the Buddha. A young man named Sigala used to worship the 6 cardinal points in the heavens, east, south, west, north, nadir, and zenith, in obeying and observing the last advice given him by his dying father. The Buddha told the young man that in the noble discipline, Ariyasa Vinaya, of his teaching, the 6 directions were different. According to his noble discipline, the 6 directions were east, parents, south, teachers, west, wife and children, north, friends, relatives and neighbors, nadir, servants and workers and employees, zenith, religious men. One should worship these 6 directions, said the Buddha. Here the word worship, namaseya, is very significant, for one worships something sacred, something worthy of honor and respect. These 6 family and social groups mentioned above are treated in Buddhism as sacred, worthy of respect and worship. But how is one to worship them? The Buddha says that one could worship them only by performing one's duties towards them. These duties are explained in his discourse to Sigala. First, parents are sacred to their children. The Buddha says, parents are called Brahma, Brahmati Mata Pitaro. The term Brahma denotes the highest and most sacred conception in Indian thought, and in it the Buddha includes parents. So in good Buddhist families at the present time, children literally worship their parents every day, morning and evening. They have to perform certain duties towards their parents, according to the noble discipline. They should look after their parents in their old age, should do whatever they have to do on their behalf, should maintain the honor of the family and continue the family tradition, should protect the wealth earned by their parents, and perform their funeral rites after their death. Parents, in turn, have certain responsibilities towards their children. They should keep their children away from evil courses, should engage them in good and profitable activities, should give them a good education, should marry them into good families, and should hand over the property to them in due course. Second, the relation between teacher and pupil. A pupil should respect and be obedient to his teacher, should attend to his needs if any, should study earnestly. And the teacher, in his turn, should train and shape his pupil properly, should teach him well, should introduce him to his friends, and should try to procure him security or employment when his education is over. Third, the relation between husband and wife. Love between the husband and wife is considered almost religious or sacred. It is called Sadara Brahmacharya, sacred family life. Here too, the significance of the term Brahma should be noted. The highest respect is given to this relationship. Wives and husbands should be faithful, respectful, and devoted to each other, and they have certain duties towards each other. The husband should always honor his wife and never be wanting in respect to her. He should love her and be faithful to her, should secure her position and comfort, and should please her by presenting her with clothing and jewelry. The fact that the Buddha did not forget to mention even such a thing as the gifts a husband should make to his wife shows how understanding and sympathetic were his humane feelings towards ordinary human emotions. The wife, in her turn, should supervise and look after household affairs, should entertain guests, visitors, friends, relatives, and employees, should love and be faithful to her husband, should protect his earnings, should be clever and energetic in all activities. Fourth, the relation between friends, relatives, and neighbors. They should be hospitable and charitable to one another, should speak pleasantly and agreeably, should work for each other's welfare, should be on equal terms with one another, should not quarrel among themselves, should help each other in need, and should not forsake each other in difficulty. Fifth, the relation between master and servant. The master or the employer has several obligations towards his servant or his employee. Work should be assigned according to ability and capacity. Adequate wages should be paid. Medical needs should be provided. Occasional donations or bonuses should be granted. The servant or employee, in his turn, should be diligent and not lazy, honest and obedient and not cheat his master. He should be earnest in his work. Sixth, the relation between the religious, literally recluses and brahmanas, and the laity. Lay people should look after the material needs of the religious with love and respect. The religious, with a loving heart, should impart knowledge and learning to the laity, and lead them along the good path away from evil. We see then that the lay life, with its family and social relations, is included in the noble discipline, and is within the framework of the Buddhist way of life, as the Buddha envisaged it. So, in the Samyutta Nikaya, one of the oldest Pali texts, Sakka, the king of the gods, Devas, declares that he worships not only the monks who live a virtuous holy life, but also lay disciples, Upasaka, who perform meritorious deeds, who are virtuous and maintain their families righteously. If one desires to become a Buddhist, there is no initiation ceremony or baptism which one has to undergo. But to become a bhikkhu, a member of the order of the Sangha, one has to undergo a long process of disciplinary training and education. If one understands the Buddha's teaching, and if one is convinced that his teaching is the right path, and if one tries to follow it, then one is a Buddhist. But according to the unbroken age-old tradition in Buddhist countries, one is considered a Buddhist if one takes the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha the order of monks, and Dhamma, the teaching, generally called the Triple Gem, as one's refuges, and undertakes to observe the 5 precepts, Pancasila, the minimum moral obligations of a lay Buddhist. 1. Not to destroy life. 2. Not to steal. 3. Not to commit adultery. 4. Not to tell lies. And 5. Not to take intoxicating drinks. Reciting the formulas given in the ancient texts. On religious occasions, Buddhists in congregation usually recite these formulas, following the lead of a Buddhist monk. There are no external rites or ceremonies which a Buddhist has to perform. Buddhism is a way of life, and what is essential is following the Noble Eightfold Path. Of course, there are in all Buddhist countries simple and beautiful ceremonies on religious occasions. There are shrines with statues of the Buddha, stupas or dagabas, and bo trees in monasteries where Buddhists worship, offer flowers, light lamps, and burn incense. This should not be likened to prayer in theistic religions. It is only a way of paying homage to the memory of the Master who showed the way. These traditional observances, though inessential, have their value in satisfying the religious emotions and needs of those who are less advanced intellectually and spiritually, and helping them gradually along the path. Those who think that Buddhism is interested only in lofty ideals, high moral and philosophical thought, and that it ignores the social and economic welfare of the people, are wrong. The Buddha was interested in the happiness of men. To him, happiness was not possible without leading a pure life based on moral and spiritual principles. But he knew that leading such a life was hard in unfavorable material and social conditions. Buddhism does not consider material welfare as an end in itself. It is only a means to an end, a higher and nobler end. But it is a means which is indispensable in achieving a higher purpose for man's happiness. So Buddhism recognizes the need of certain minimum material conditions favorable to spiritual success, even that of a monk engaged in meditation in some solitary place. Footnote: Buddhist monks, members of the order of the Sangha, are not expected to have personal property, but they are allowed to hold communal Sangika property. End of footnote. The Buddha did not take life out of the context of its social and economic background. He looked at it as a whole, in all its social, economic, and political aspects. His teachings on ethical, spiritual, and philosophical problems are fairly well known. But little is known, particularly in the West, about his teaching on social, economic, and political matters. Yet there are numerous discourses dealing with these scattered throughout the ancient Buddhist texts. Let us take only a few examples. The Kakavati Siddhanta Sutta of the Digha Nikaya clearly states that poverty, dalidya, is the cause of immorality and crimes such as theft, falsehood, violence, hatred, cruelty, etc. Kings in ancient times, like governments today, tried to suppress crime through punishment. The Kuttadanta Sutta of the same Nikaya explains how futile this is. It says that this method can never be successful. Instead, the Buddha suggests that, in order to eradicate crime, the economic condition of the people should be improved. Grain and other facilities for agriculture should be provided for farmers and cultivators. Capital should be provided for traders and those engaged in business. Adequate wages should be paid to those who are employed. When people are thus provided for with opportunities for earning a sufficient income, they will be contented, will have no fear or anxiety, and consequently the country will be peaceful and free from crime. Because of this, the Buddha told lay people how important it is to improve their economic condition. This does not mean that he approved of hoarding wealth with desire and attachment, which is against his fundamental teaching. Nor did he approve of each and every way of earning one's livelihood. There are certain trades, like the production and sale of armaments, which he condemns as an evil means of livelihood, as we saw earlier. A man named Digajanu once visited the Buddha and said, "Venerable Sir, we are ordinary laymen, leading the family life with wife and children. Would the Blessed One teach us some doctrines which would be conducive to our happiness in this world and hereafter?" The Buddha tells him that there are 4 things which are conducive to a man's happiness in this world. First, he should be skilled, efficient, earnest, and energetic in whatever profession he is engaged, and he should know it well, Uttana Sampada. Second, he should protect his income, which he has thus earned righteously with the sweat of his brow, Araka Sampada. This refers to protecting wealth from thieves, etc. All these ideas should be considered against the background of the period. Third, he should have good friends, Kalyana Mita, who are faithful, learned, virtuous, liberal, and intelligent, who will help him along the right path away from evil. Fourth, he should spend reasonably in proportion to his income, neither too much nor too little, i.e., he should not hoard wealth avariciously, nor should he be extravagant. In other words, he should live within his means, Samajivikata. Then the Buddha expounds the 4 virtues conducive to a layman's happiness hereafter. 1. Sada. He should have faith and confidence in moral, spiritual, and intellectual values. 2. Sila. He should abstain from destroying and harming life, from stealing and cheating, from adultery, from falsehood, and from intoxicating drinks. 3. Kaga. He should practice charity, generosity, without attachment and craving for his wealth. 4. Panya. He should develop wisdom, which leads to the complete destruction of suffering, to the realization of nirvana. Sometimes the Buddha even went into details about saving money and spending it, as, for instance, when he told the young man Sigala that he should spend 1/4 of his income on his daily expenses, invest half in his business, and put aside 1/4 for any emergency. Once the Buddha told Anathapindika, a great banker, one of his most devoted lay disciples, who founded for him the celebrated Jetavana monastery at Savatthi, that a layman, who leads an ordinary family life, has 4 kinds of happiness. The first happiness is to enjoy economic security, or sufficient wealth acquired by just and righteous means, Atisukha. The second is spending that wealth liberally on himself, his family, his friends and relatives, and on meritorious deeds, Bhogasukha. The third, to be free from debts, Ananasukha. The fourth happiness is to live a faultless and pure life without committing evil in thought, word, or deed, Anavajasukha. It must be noted here that 3 of these kinds are economic, and that the Buddha finally reminded the banker that economic and material happiness is not worth 1/16th part of the spiritual happiness arising out of a faultless and good life. From the few examples given above, one could see that the Buddha considered economic welfare as requisite for human happiness, but that he did not recognize progress as real and true if it was only material, devoid of a spiritual and moral foundation. While encouraging material progress, Buddhism always lays great stress on the development of the moral and spiritual character for a happy, peaceful, and contented society. The Buddha was just as clear on politics, on war and peace. It is too well known to be repeated here that Buddhism advocates and preaches nonviolence and peace as its universal message, and does not approve of any kind of violence or destruction of life. According to Buddhism, there is nothing that can be called a, quote, just war, which is only a false term coined and put into circulation to justify and excuse hatred, cruelty, violence, and massacre. Who decides what is just or unjust? The mighty and the victorious are just, and the weak and the defeated are, quote, unjust. Our war is always just, and your war is always unjust. Buddhism does not accept this position. The Buddha not only taught nonviolence and peace, but he even went to the field of battle itself and intervened personally and prevented war, as is in the case of the dispute between the Shakyas and the Koliyas, who were prepared to fight over the question of the waters of the Rohini. And his words once prevented King Ajatasattu from attacking the kingdom of the Vajis. In the days of the Buddha, as today, there were rulers who governed their countries unjustly. People were oppressed and exploited, tortured and persecuted, excessive taxes were imposed, and cruel punishments were inflicted. The Buddha was deeply moved by these inhumanities. The Dhammapada Thakatha records that he, therefore, directed his attention to the problem of good government. His views should be appreciated against the social, economic, and political background of his time. He had shown how a whole country could become corrupt, degenerate, and unhappy when the heads of its government, that is, the king, the ministers, and administrative officers, become corrupt and unjust. For a country to be happy, it must have a just government. How this form of just government could be realized is explained by the Buddha in his teaching of the, quote, 10 duties of the king, Dasaraja Dhamma, as given in the Jitaka text. Of course, the term king, Raja, of old, should be replaced today by the term government. The 10 duties of the king, therefore, apply today to all those who constitute the government, such as the head of state, ministers, political leaders, legislative and administrative officers, etc. The first of the 10 duties of the king is liberality, generosity, charity, dana. The ruler should not have craving and attachment to wealth and property, but should give it away for the welfare of the people. Second, a high moral character, sila. He should never destroy life, cheat, steal, and exploit others, commit adultery, utter falsehood, and take intoxicating drinks. That is, he must at least observe the 5 precepts of the layman. Third, sacrificing everything for the good of the people, parichaga. He must be prepared to give up all personal comfort, name and fame, and even his life, in the interest of the people. Fourth, honesty and integrity, Ajava. He must be free from fear or favor in the discharge of his duties, must be sincere in his intentions, and must not deceive the public. Fifth, kindness and gentleness, Madhava. He must possess a genial temperament. Sixth, austerity in habits, Tamba. He must lead a simple life and should not indulge in a life of luxury. He must have self-control. Seventh, freedom from hatred, ill will, enmity, Akoda. He should bear no grudge against anybody. Eighth, nonviolence, Avihimsa, which means not only that he should harm nobody, but also that he should try to promote peace by avoiding and preventing war, and everything which involves violence and destruction of life. Ninth, patience, forbearance, tolerance, and understanding, Kanti. He must be able to bear hardships, difficulties, and insults without losing his temper. 10th, non-opposition, non-obstruction, Avirodha. That is to say that he should not oppose the will of the people, should not obstruct any measures that are conducive to the welfare of the people. In other words, he should rule in harmony with his people. Footnote. It is interesting to note here that the 5 principles, or Panchasila, in India's foreign policy are in accordance with the Buddhist principles, which Ashoka, the great Buddhist emperor of India, applied to the administration of his government in the 3rd century BC. The expression Panchasila, 5 precepts, or virtues, is itself a Buddhist term. End of footnote. If a country is ruled by men endowed with such qualities, it is needless to say that the country must be happy. But this was not a utopia, for there were kings in the past like Ashoka of India who had established kingdoms based on these ideas. The world today lives in constant fear, suspicion, and tension. Science has produced weapons which are capable of unimaginable destruction. Brandishing these new instruments of death, great powers threaten and challenge one another, boasting shamelessly that one could cause more destruction and misery in the world than the other. They have gone along this path of madness to such a point that, now, if they take one more step forward in that direction, the result will be nothing but mutual annihilation along with the total destruction of humanity. Human beings, in fear of the situation they have themselves created, want to find a way out and seek some kind of a solution. But there is none except that held out by the Buddha, his message of nonviolence and peace, of love and compassion, of tolerance and understanding, of truth and wisdom, of respect and regard for all life, of freedom from selfishness, hatred, and violence. The Buddha says, quote, "Never by hatred is hatred appeased, but it is appeased by kindness. This is an eternal truth." Another quote, "One should win anger through kindness, wickedness through goodness, selfishness through charity, and falsehood through truthfulness." End quote. There can be no peace or happiness for man as long as he desires and thirsts after conquering and subjugating his neighbor. As the Buddha says, quote, "The victor breeds hatred, and the defeated lies down in misery. He who renounces both victory and defeat is happy and peaceful." End quote. The only conquest that brings peace and happiness is self-conquest. Quote, One may conquer millions in battle, but he who conquers himself, only one, is the greatest of conquerors. End quote. You will say this is all very beautiful, noble, and sublime, but impractical. Is it practical to hate one another? To kill one another? To live in internal fear and suspicion like wild animals in a jungle? Is this more practical and comfortable? Was hatred ever appeased by hatred? Was evil ever won over by evil? But there are examples, at least in individual cases, where hatred is appeased by love and kindness, and evil won over by goodness. You will say that this may be true, practicable in individual cases, but that it never works in national and international affairs. People are hypnotized, psychologically puzzled, blinded and deceived by the political and propaganda usage of such terms as national, international, or state. But what is a nation but a vast conglomeration of individuals? A nation or a state does not act. It is the individual who acts. What the individual thinks and does is what the nation or the state does and thinks. What is applicable to the individual is applicable to the nation or the state. If hatred can be appeased by love and kindness on the individual scale, surely it can be realized on the national and international scale too. Even in the case of a single person, to meet hatred with kindness, one must have tremendous courage, boldness, faith, and confidence in moral force. May it not be even more so with regard to international affairs? If by the expression not practical you mean not easy, you are right. Definitely it is not easy. But it should be tried. You may say it is risky trying it. Surely it cannot be riskier than trying a nuclear war. It is a consolation and inspiration to think today that at least there was one great ruler, well known in history, who had the courage, the confidence, and the vision to apply this teaching of nonviolence, peace, and love to the administration of a vast empire in both internal and external affairs. Ashoka, the great Buddhist emperor of India, the 3rd century BC, the beloved of the gods, as he was called. At first, he followed the example of his father, Bindusara, and grandfather, Chandragupta, and wished to complete the conquest of the Indian peninsula. He invaded and conquered Kalinga and annexed it. Many hundreds of thousands were killed, wounded, tortured, and taken prisoner in this war. But later, when he became a Buddhist, he was completely changed and transformed by the Buddha's teaching. In one of his famous edicts, inscribed on Rock Edict number 13, as it is now called, the original of which one may read even today, referring to the conquest of Kalinga, the emperor publicly expressed his repentance and said how extremely painful it was for him to think of that carnage. He publicly declared that he would never draw his sword again for any conquest, but that he, quote, wishes all living beings nonviolence, self-control, the practice of serenity and mildness. This, of course, is considered the chief conquest by the beloved of the gods, i.e. Ashoka, namely the conquest by piety, Dhammavijaya. Not only did he renounce war himself, he expressed his desire that my sons and grandsons will not think of a new conquest as worth achieving. Let them think of that conquest only which is the conquest by piety. That is good for this world and the world beyond. End quote. This is the only example in the history of mankind of a victorious conqueror at the zenith of his power, still possessing the strength to continue his territorial conquests, yet renouncing war and violence and turning to peace and nonviolence. Here is a lesson for the world today. The ruler of an empire publicly turned his back on war and violence and embraced the message of peace and nonviolence. There is no historical evidence to show that any neighboring king took advantage of Ashoka's piety to attack him militarily, or that there was any revolt or rebellion within his empire during his lifetime. On the contrary, there was peace throughout the land, and even countries outside his empire seem to have accepted his benign leadership. To talk of maintaining peace through the balance of power, or through the threat of nuclear deterrence, is foolish. The might of armaments can only produce fear and not peace. It is impossible that there can be genuine and lasting peace through fear. Through fear can only come hatred, ill will, and hostility, suppressed perhaps for the time being only, but ready to erupt and become violent at any moment. True and genuine peace can prevail only in an atmosphere of metta, amity, free from fear, suspicion, and danger. Buddhism aims at creating a society where the ruinous struggle for power is renounced, where calm and peace prevail away from conquest and defeat, where the persecution of the innocent is vehemently denounced, where one who conquers oneself is more respected than those who conquer millions by military and economic warfare, where hatred is conquered by kindness and evil by goodness, where enmity, jealousy, ill will, and greed do not infect men's minds, where compassion is the driving force of action, where all, including the least of living things, are treated with fairness, consideration, and love, where life in peace and harmony, in a world of material contentment, is directed towards the highest and noblest aim, the realization of the ultimate truth, nirvana. End of section. What the Buddha Taught by Walpola Raula. Selected texts. A word of explanation may help the modern reader to understand and appreciate the style of the original Pali texts selected for translation here. 3 months after the Buddha's parinirvana, death, a council of the disciples closely associated with him was held, at which all his teaching, discourses, and rules of discipline, as they were remembered, were recited, approved as authentic, and classified into 5 collections, called Nikayas, which constitute the Tipitaka, triple canon. These collections were entrusted to various theras, or elders, and to their pupillary succession for oral transmission for the benefit of future generations. In order to perpetuate an unbroken and authentic oral transmission, regular and systematic recitation is necessary. It must be particularly noted that this recitation was not the act of a single individual alone, but of a group. The purpose of this mode of collective recitation was to keep the texts intact, free from change, modification, or interpolation. If one member of the group forgot a word, another would remember it. Or if one modified, added, or omitted a word or a phrase, another would correct him. In this way, it was hoped, nothing could be changed, modified, added, or omitted. Texts handed down through an unbroken oral tradition of this kind were considered more reliable and authentic than any record of the teachings set down by a single individual alone, many years after the death of their promulgator. The teachings of the Buddha were committed to writing for the first time at a council in the 1st century BC, held in Ceylon 4 centuries after his death. Up to that time, the whole of the Tipitaka had been handed down from generation to generation in this unbroken oral tradition. The original texts are in Pali, a language soft, melodious, and smooth-flowing. Their frequent repetitions, the use of categories, not only help memorization, which is necessary for the continuity of oral tradition, but also give them poetic beauty and charm. They use poetic rhythms and have all the grace of poetry. The recitation of these texts in the original Pali in the calm atmosphere of a tropical grove or in a monastery still produces beautiful, harmonious, and serene effects. The sonorous Pali words, their grandeur, and the well-known cadence of repetitions produce the effect, even for someone who does not know their meaning, of a solemn chant in an unknown tongue. Recitation of this kind, with its conventional melodic line, was so peaceful and moving that some narratives related that the deities in the woods were sometimes fascinated and attracted by it. In the following selections from the original canon, the repetitions are rendered in full only in some places, in order to give the reader an idea of their style. In other places, they are indicated by dots. I have tried to render the original Pali as closely as possible into English, without offending the original sense and tone of the Buddha's words or modern English usage. End of section. What the Buddha Taught by Walpola Raula. Text. Setting in motion the wheel of truth. Dhammacakka Pavattana Sutta, the first sermon of the Buddha. Thus have I heard. The Blessed One was once living in the deer park at Isapatana, the resort of seers, near Varanasi, Benares. There he addressed the group of 5 bhikkhus. Bhikkhus, these 2 extremes ought not to be practiced by one who has gone forth from the household life. What are the 2? There is devotion to the indulgence of sense pleasures, which is low, common, the way of the ordinary people, unworthy and unprofitable. And there is devotion to self-mortification, which is painful, unworthy, and unprofitable. Quote, continue, quote. Avoiding both these extremes, the Tathagata has realized the middle path. It gives vision, it gives knowledge, and it leads to calm, to insight, to enlightenment, to nibbana. And what is that middle path? It is simply the Noble Eightfold Path, namely, right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. This is the middle path realized by the Tathagata, which gives vision, which gives knowledge, and which leads to calm, to insight, to enlightenment, to nibbana. The noble truth of suffering, dukkha, is this. Birth is suffering. Aging is suffering. Sickness is suffering. Death is suffering. Sorrow and lamentation, pain, grief, and despair are suffering. Association with the unpleasant is suffering. Disassociation from the pleasant is suffering. Not to get what one wants is suffering. In brief, the 5 aggregates of attachment are suffering. The noble truth of the origin of suffering is this. It is this thirst, craving, which produces re-existence and re-becoming. bound up with passionate greed. It finds fresh delight now here and now there, namely, thirst for sense pleasures, thirst for existence and becoming, and thirst for non-existence, self-annihilation. The noble truth of the cessation of suffering is this. It is the complete cessation of that very thirst, giving it up, renouncing it, emancipating oneself from it, detaching oneself from it. The noble truth of the path leading to the cessation of suffering is this. It is simply the noble eightfold path, namely, right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. This is the noble truth of suffering, dukkha. Such was the vision, the knowledge, the wisdom, the science, the light that arose in me with regard to things not heard before. This suffering, as a noble truth, should be fully understood. Such was the vision, the knowledge, the wisdom, science, the light that arose in me with regard to things not heard before. This suffering as a noble truth has been fully understood. Repeats. This is the noble truth of the origin of suffering. Such was the vision, etc. This origin of suffering as a noble truth should be abandoned. Such was the vision, etc. This origin of suffering as a noble truth has been abandoned. Such was the vision, etc., with regards to things not heard before. This repeats for the third and fourth noble truths as well. Continue quote. As long as my vision of true knowledge was not fully clear in these three aspects, in these 12 ways regarding the Four Noble Truths, I did not claim to have realized the perfect enlightenment that is supreme in the world with its gods, with its maras and brahmas, in this world with its recluses and brahmanas, with its princes and men. Footnote. As may be seen from the 4 preceding paragraphs, with regard to each of the Four Noble Truths, there are 3 aspects of knowledge. 1, the knowledge that is the truth, satchananya. 2, the knowledge that a certain function or action with regard to this truth should be performed, kichananya. And 3, the knowledge that what the function or action with regard to this truth has been performed, katanyanya. When these 3 aspects are applied to each of the Four Noble Truths, 12 ways are obtained. End of footnote. Continue quote. But when my vision of true knowledge was fully clear in these 3 aspects, in these 12 ways, regarding the Four Noble Truths, then I claimed to have realized the perfect enlightenment that is supreme in the world with its gods, its maras, and brahmas, in this world with its recluses and brahmanas, with its princes and men. And a vision of true knowledge arose in me thus: my heart's deliverance is unassailable. This is the last birth. Now there is no more rebecoming, rebirth. End of quote. This the Blessed One said. The group of 5 bhikkhus was glad, and they rejoiced at his words. Samyutta Nikaya, LVI 11. End of section. What the Buddha Taught by Walpola Raula. Section. The Fire Sermon. Adita Pariyaya Sutta. Footnote. It is interesting to note here that Section 3 of The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot is called the Fire Sermon. In the note to line 308, burning, 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 Eliot writes, the complete text of the Buddha's fire sermon, which corresponds to the importance of the Sermon on the Mount, from which these words are taken, will be found translated in the late Henry Clark's Warren's Buddhism in Translation, Harvard Oriental Series. Mr. Warren was one of the great pioneers of Buddhist studies in the Occident. The translation of the sutta given here, made by the present author, especially for this edition, is from the original Pali of the Samyutta Nikaya, of the Sutta Pitaka. Warren's translation was of the narrative as found in the Mahavagga of the Vinaya Pitaka. End footnote. Beginning of the fire sermon. Thus have I heard. The Blessed One was once living at Gayasisa in Gaya with 1,000 bhikkhus. There he addressed the bhikkhus. Quote, Bhikkhus, all is burning. And what is the all that is burning? Bhikkhus, the eye is burning. Visible forms are burning. Visual consciousness is burning. Visual impression is burning. Also whatever sensation, pleasant or painful, or neither painful nor pleasant, arises on account of the visual impression, that too is burning. Burning with what? Burning with the fire of lust, with the fire of hate, with the fire of delusion. I say it is burning with birth, aging, and death, with sorrows, with lamentations, with pains, with griefs, with despairs. The ear is burning. Sounds are burning. Auditory consciousness is burning. Auditory impression is burning. Also, whatever sensation, pleasant or painful, or neither painful nor pleasant, arises on account of the auditory impression, that too is burning. Burning with what? Burning with the fire of lust. ... The nose is burning. Odors are burning. Olfactory consciousness is burning. Olfactory impression is burning. Also whatever sensation, pleasant or painful, or neither painful nor pleasant, arises on account of the olfactory impression, that too is burning. Burning with what? Burning with the fire of lust. ... The tongue is burning. Flavors are burning. Gustative consciousness is burning. Gustative impression is burning. Also whatever sensation, pleasant or painful, or neither painful nor pleasant, arises on account of the gustative impression, that too is burning. Burning with what? Burning with the fire of lust. ... The body is burning. Tangible things are burning. Tactile consciousness is burning. Tactile impression is burning. Also whatever sensation, pleasant or painful, or neither painful nor pleasant, arises on account of the tactile sensation, that too is burning. Burning with what? Burning with the fire of lust. ... The mind is burning. Mental objects, ideas, etc., are burning. Mental consciousness is burning. Mental impression is burning. Also whatever sensation, pleasant or painful, or neither painful nor pleasant, is burning, arises on account of the mental impression, that too is burning. Burning with what? Burning with the fire of lust, with the fire of hate, with the fire of delusion. I say it is burning with birth, aging, and death, with sorrows, with lamentations, with pains, with griefs, with despairs. Bhikkhus, a learned and noble disciple, who sees things thus, becomes dispassionate with regard to the eye, becomes dispassionate with regard to visible forms, becomes dispassionate with regard to the visual consciousness, becomes dispassionate with regard to the visual impression. Also, whatever sensation, pleasant or painful, or neither painful nor pleasant, arises on account of the visual impression. With regard to that too, he becomes dispassionate. He becomes dispassionate with regard to the ear, with regard to sounds, ... He becomes dispassionate with regard to the nose, ... with regard to odors, ... He becomes dispassionate with regard to the tongue, ... with regard to flavors, ... He becomes dispassionate with regard to the body, ... with regard to tangible things, ... He becomes dispassionate with regard to the mind, becomes dispassionate with regard to mental objects, ideas, etc. Becomes dispassionate with regard to mental consciousness, becomes dispassionate with regard to mental impression, also whatever sensation, pleasant or painful, or neither painful nor pleasant, arises on account of mental impression. With regard to that too, he becomes dispassionate. Being dispassionate, he becomes detached. Through detachment, he is liberated. When liberated, there is knowledge that he is liberated, and he knows. Birth is exhausted, and the holy life has been lived. And what has to be done is done. There is no more left to be done on this account. End of Buddha's quote. This the Blessed One said. The bhikkhus were glad, and they rejoiced at his words. While this exposition was being delivered, the minds of those thousands bhikkhus were liberated from impurities without attachment. Samyutta Nikaya, XXXB, 28. End of section. What the Buddha Taught, by Walpola Raula. Section. Text. Universal Love. Metta Sutta. He who is skilled and good, and who wishes to attain that state of calm, should act thus. He should be able, upright, perfectly upright, compliant, gentle, and humble. Contented, easily supported, with few duties, of simple livelihood, controlled in senses, discreet, not impudent. He should not be greedily attached to families. He should not commit any slight wrong, such that other wise men might censure him. Then he should cultivate his thoughts thus. May all beings be happy and secure. May their minds be contented. Whatever living beings there may be, feeble or strong, long or tall, stout or medium, short, small or large, seen or unseen, those dwelling far or near, those who are born and those who are yet to be born, may all beings, without exception, be happy-minded. Let not one deceive one another, nor despise any person, whatever, in any place. In anger or ill will, let not one wish any harm to another. Just as a mother would protect her only child, even at the risk of her own life, even so let one cultivate a boundless heart towards all beings. Let one's thoughts of boundless love pervade the whole world, above, below, and across, without any obstruction, without any hatred, without any enmity. Whether one stands, walks, sits, or lies down, as long as one is awake, one should maintain this mindfulness. This, they say, is the sublime state in this life. Not falling into wrong views, virtuous and endowed with insight, one gives up attachment to sense desires. Verily, such a man does not return to enter a womb again. Suettanipata 1:8. End of section. What the Buddha Taught by Walpola Raula. Section. Blessings. Mangala Sutta. Thus have I heard. The Blessed One was once living at the monastery of Anathapindika in Jeta's Grove, near Savatthi. Now when the night was far advanced, a certain deity, whose surpassing splendor illuminated the entire Jeta Grove, came into the presence of the Blessed One, and, drawing near, respectfully saluted him and stood on one side. Standing thus, he addressed the Blessed One in verse. Quote, Many deities and men, yearning after happiness, have pondered on blessings. Pray, tell me the highest blessing. End quote. Beginning of Buddha's response. Not to associate with fools, to associate with the wise, and to honor those who are worthy of honor, this is the highest blessing. To reside in a suitable locality, to have done meritorious actions in the past, and to set oneself in the right course, this is the highest blessing. Vast learning, skill in handicraft, a highly trained discipline, and pleasant speech, this is the highest blessing. Supporting one's father and mother, cherishing wife and children, and peaceful occupations, this is the highest blessing. Liberality, righteous conduct, the helping of relatives, and blameless actions, this is the highest blessing. To cease and abstain from evil, abstention from intoxicating drinks, and diligence in virtue, this is the highest blessing. Reverence, humility, contentment, gratitude, and the opportune hearing of the Dhamma, this is the highest blessing. Patience, obedience, seeing the samanas, holy men, and taking part in religious discussions at proper times, this is the highest blessing. Self-control, the holy life, the perception of the noble truths, and the realization of Nibbana, this is the highest blessing. If a man's mind is sorrowless, stainless, and secure, and does not shake when touched by worldly vicissitudes, this is the highest blessing. Those who thus acting are everywhere unconquered, attain happiness everywhere. To them these are the highest blessings. Sutta-nipata 2:4. What the Buddha Taught by Walpola Raula. Text. Getting rid of all cares and troubles. Sabbasava Sutta. Thus have I heard. The Blessed One was once living at the monastery of Anathapindika in Jeta's Grove near Savatthi. There he addressed the bhikkhus, saying, Bhikkhus, and they replied to him, Venerable Sir. The Blessed One spoke as follows. Bhikkhus, I will expound to you the method of restraining all cares and troubles. Footnote. The term asava in this sutta has wider senses than its usual psychological and ethical meanings, such as influx, outflow, defilement, impurity. It is here used figuratively and embraces both psychological cares and physical troubles and difficulties, as can be seen in the sequel. End footnote. Listen and reflect well. I shall speak to you. Yes, Venerable Sir, they said in response to the Blessed One. He then spoke as follows. Bhikkhus, I say that the destruction, getting rid, of cares and troubles is possible for one who knows and who sees, not for one who does not know and does not see. What must a person know and see in order that the destruction, getting rid of, cares and troubles should be possible? These are wise reflection and unwise reflection. For a person who reflects unwisely, there arise cares and troubles which have not yet arisen, and in addition, those who have already arisen increase. But for him who reflects wisely, cares and troubles which have not yet arisen do not arise, and in addition, those already arisen disappear. Bhikkhus. 1. There are the cares and troubles which are to be got rid of by insight. 2. There are cares and troubles which are to be got rid of by restraint. 3. There are cares and troubles which are to be got rid of by use. 4. There are cares and troubles which are to be got rid of by endurance. 5. There are cares and troubles which are to be got rid of by avoidance. 6. There are cares and troubles which are to be got rid of by dispersal. And 7. There are cares and troubles which are to be got rid of by culture. One. Bhikkhus. What are the cares and troubles which are to be got rid of by insight? Bhikkhus, the uninstructed ordinary man, who does not see the noble ones, who is unversed in the teachings of the noble ones, who is untrained in the teachings of the noble ones, who does not see good men, who is unversed in the teachings of good men, who is untrained in the teachings of good men, does not understand what things should be reflected on and which things should not be reflected on. Not knowing what things should be reflected on, what things should not be reflected on, he reflects on things that should not be reflected on, and does not reflect on things that should be reflected on. Now, bhikkhus, what are the things that should not be reflected on, but which he reflects? If in a person, reflecting on certain things, there arises the defilement of sense pleasures, which has not yet arisen, and in addition, the defilement of sense pleasure which has already arisen in him increases, the defilement of, the desire for, existence and for becoming, the defilement of ignorance which has not yet arisen arises, and in addition, the defilement of ignorance which has already arisen in him increases. Then these are the things that should not be reflected on, but which on he reflects. Bhikkhus, what are the things that should be reflected on, but on which he does not reflect? If in a person, reflecting on certain things, the defilement of sense pleasure, which has not yet arisen, does not arise, and, in addition, the defilement of sense pleasure, which has already arisen in him, disappears, the defilement of, the desire for, existence and for becoming, the defilement of ignorance, which has not yet arisen, does not arise, and, in addition, the defilement of ignorance, which has already arisen in him, disappears. These are the things that should be reflected on, but on which he does not reflect. By reflecting on things that should not be reflected on, and by not reflecting on things that should be reflected on, defilements that have not yet arisen arise, and defilements that have already arisen in him increase. Then he reflects unwisely, unnecessarily, in this way. 1. Did I exist in the past? 2. Did I not exist in the past? 3. What was I in the past? 4. How was I in the past? 5. Having been what, did I become what in the past? 6. Shall I exist in the future? 7. Shall I not exist in the future? 8. What shall I be in the future? 9. How shall I be in the future? 10. Having been what, shall I become what in the future? Or now, at the present time, he is doubtful about himself. 11. Am I? 12. Am I not? 13. What am I? 14. How am I? 15. Whence came this person? 16. Whither will he go? Whether he reflects unwisely in this way, one of the 6 false views arises in him. 1. I have a self. This view arises in him as true and real. 2. I have no self. This view arises in him as true and real. 3. By self I perceive self. This view arises in him as true and real. 4. By self I perceive non-self. This view arises in him as true and real. 5. By non-self I perceive self. This view arises in him as true and real. 6. Or a wrong view arises in him as follows. This myself, which speaks and feels, which experiences the fruits of good and bad actions, now here and now there. This self is permanent, stable, everlasting, unchanging, remaining the same forever and ever. This, bhikkhus, is what is called becoming enmeshed in views, a jungle of views, a wilderness of views, scuffling in views, the agitation, struggle of views, the fetter of views. Bhikkhus, the uninstructed ordinary man, fettered by the fetters of views, does not liberate himself from birth, aging, and death, from sorrows, lamentations, pains, griefs, and despairs. I say that he does not liberate himself from suffering, dukkha. And bhikkhus, the instructed noble disciple, who sees the noble ones, who is versed in the teachings of the noble ones, who is well trained in the teachings of the noble ones, who sees good men, who is versed in the teachings of good men, who is well trained in the teachings of good men, knows what things should be reflected on and what should not be reflected on. Knowing what things should be reflected on, what not, and what should not be reflected on, he does not reflect on things that should not be reflected on, and reflects on things that should be reflected on. Now, bhikkhus, what are the things that should not be reflected on, which he does not reflect? If in a person, reflecting on certain things, there arises the defilement of sense pleasures, which has not yet arisen, and, in addition, the defilement of sense pleasures which has already arisen in him increases, the defilement of the desire for existence and for becoming, ... The defilement of ignorance which has not yet arisen arises, and the defilement of ignorance which has already arisen in him increases. These are the things which should not be reflected on, and on which he does not reflect. Bhikkhus, what are the things that should be reflected on, and on which he reflects? If in a person, reflecting on certain things, the defilement of sense pleasure, which has not yet arisen, does not arise, and, in addition, the defilement of sense pleasure, which has already arisen in him, disappears. The defilement of the desire for existence and for becoming, ... The defilement of ignorance, which has not yet arisen, does not arise, and, in addition, the defilement of ignorance, which has already arisen in him, disappears. These are the things that should be reflected on, and on which he reflects. By not reflecting on things that should not be reflected on, and by reflecting on things that should be reflected on, the defilements that have not yet arisen do not arise, and, in addition, the defilements that have already arisen in him disappear. Then he reflects wisely. This is dukkha, suffering. He reflects wisely. This is the arising cause of dukkha. He reflects wisely. This is the cessation of dukkha. He reflects wisely. This is the path leading to the cessation of dukkha. When he reflects wisely in this matter, the three fetters, the false idea of self, skeptical doubt, attachment to observances and rites, fall away from him. Because these are called the troubles, defilements, fetters, that should be got rid of by insight. 2. Bhikkhus, what are the cares and troubles to be got rid of by restraint? Bhikkhus, a bhikkhu, considering wisely, lives with his eyes restrained. Now, if there are any troubles, distresses, and vexations for him when he lives without restraining his eyes, those troubles, distresses, and vexations are not for him when he lives restraining his eyes in this matter. Considering wisely, he lives with his ears restrained, with his nose restrained, with his tongue, with his body, with his mind restrained. Now, if there are any troubles, distresses, and vexations for him when he lives without restraining his mind, those troubles, distresses, and vexations are not for him when he lives restraining his mind in this matter. Because these are called the cares and troubles to be got rid of by restraint. 3. Bhikkhus, what are the cares and troubles to be got rid of by use? Bhikkhus, a bhikkhu, considering wisely, makes use of his robes, only to keep off cold, to keep off heat, to keep off gadflies, mosquitoes, winds, and the sun, and creeping creatures, and to cover himself decently. Considering wisely, he makes use of food, neither for pleasures nor for excess, intoxication, neither for beauty nor for adornment, but only to support and sustain this body, to keep it from hurt, fatigue, and to foster the holy life, thinking, in this way I put out the feeling of suffering, hunger, which is already there, and will not produce a new feeling. And my life will be maintained in a blamelessness, harmlessness, and convenience. Considering wisely, he makes use of lodging, only to keep off cold, to keep off heat, to keep off gadflies and mosquitoes, winds and the sun, and creeping creatures, to dispel the risks of the seasons and to enjoy seclusion. Considering wisely, he makes use of medicaments and medical requirements, only to get rid of pains and illnesses which he may have and to maintain his health. Because if there are any troubles, distresses, and vexations for him who does not use any of these things, these troubles, distresses, and vexations are not for him when he uses them in this manner. Because these are called the cares and troubles which are to be got rid of by use. 4. Bhikkhus, what are the cares and troubles to be got rid of by endurance? Bhikkhus, a bhikkhu, considering wisely, puts up with cold and heat, hunger and thirst, with gadflies, mosquitoes, winds, the sun and creeping creatures, abusive and hurtful language. He becomes inured to the endurance of bodily feelings which are painful, acute, sharp, severe, unpleasant, disagreeable, deadly. Because if there are any troubles, distresses, and vexations for a person who does not endure any of these troubles, distresses, and vexations are not for him who endures them in this manner. Because these are called the cares and troubles which are to be got rid of by endurance. 5. Bhikkhus, what are the cares and troubles to be got rid of by avoidance? Bhikkhus, a bhikkhu, considering wisely, avoids a savage elephant, a savage horse, a savage bull, a savage dog, avoids a snake, the stump of a tree, a thorny hedge, a pit or hole, a precipice, a refuse pool or a dirty pool. Considering wisely, he also avoids sitting in such unseemly places, and frequenting such unseemly resorts, and cultivating such bad friends as would lead the discreet among his fellows in the holy life to conclude that he has gone astray. Bhikkhus, if there are any troubles, distresses, and vexations for him, when he does not avoid any such things, such as these, those troubles, distresses, and vexations would not be for him when he avoids them in this manner. These are called the cares and troubles which are to be got rid of by avoidance. 6. What are the cares and troubles to be got rid of by dispersal? Bhikkhus, a bhikkhu, considering wisely, does not tolerate, rejects, discards, destroys, extinguishes thoughts of sense pleasure which have arisen in him. He does not tolerate thoughts of ill will. He does not tolerate thoughts of violence. He does not tolerate, rejects, discards, destroys, extinguishes whatever evil and unwholesome thoughts which have arisen in him. Bhikkhus, if there are any troubles, distresses, and vexations for him, he does not disperse any of these. Those troubles, distresses, and vexations would not be for him when he disperses them in this manner. Bhikkhus, these are called the cares and troubles which are to be got rid of by dispersal. 7. Bhikkhus, what are the cares and troubles to be got rid of by culture, bhavana? Bhikkhus, a bhikkhu, considering wisely, cultivates mindfulness, a factor of enlightenment associated with detachment, with passionlessness, with cessation, maturing into renunciation. Considering wisely, he cultivates the investigation of the Dhamma, a factor of enlightenment, energy, a factor of enlightenment, joy, a factor of enlightenment, calmness, relaxation, a factor of enlightenment, concentration, a factor of enlightenment, equanimity, a factor of enlightenment associated with detachment, with passionlessness, with cessation, maturing into renunciation. Bhikkhus, if there are any troubles, distresses, and vexations for him, when he does not cultivate any of these troubles, distresses and vexations would not be for him when he cultivates them in this manner. Bhikkhus, these are called cares and troubles which are to be got rid of by culture. Bhikkhus, a bhikkhu in whom the cares and troubles which are to be got rid of by insight have been got rid of by insight. The cares and troubles which are to be got rid of by restraint have been got rid of by restraint. The cares and troubles which are to be got rid of by use have been got rid of by use. The cares and troubles which are to be got rid of by endurance have been got rid of by endurance. The cares and troubles which are to be got rid of by avoidance have been got rid of by avoidance. The cares and troubles which are to be got rid of by dispersal have been got rid of by dispersal. The cares and troubles which are to be got rid of by culture have been got rid of by culture. Bhikkhus, it is this bhikkhu who is said to have restrained all cares and troubles. He has cut off craving, struck off his fetters, and by fathoming false pride, has put an end to suffering. End of Buddha's quote. Thus spoke the Blessed One. Glad at heart, those bhikkhus rejoiced at the words of the Blessed One. Majjhima Nikaya, number 2. End of section. What the Buddha Taught by Walpola Rahula. Section. The Parable of the Piece of Cloth, Vatupama Sutta. Thus have I heard. The Blessed One was once living at the monastery of Anathapindika in Jeta's Grove near Savatthi. There the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus, saying, "Bhikkhus," and they replied to him, "Venerable sir." The Blessed One then spoke as follows. If a soiled and dirty piece of cloth is dipped by the fuller in any dye at all, blue, yellow, red, or pink, it will still be a bad and dirty color. Why? Because the cloth is not clean. Even so, bhikkhus, when the mind is impure, a bad future life must be expected. If a perfectly clean piece of cloth is dipped by the fuller in any dye at all, blue, yellow, red, or pink, it will be a beautiful and clean color. Why? Because the cloth is clean. Even so, bhikkhus, when the mind is pure, a good future life must be expected. Now, what are the mind's impurities? Cupidity, excessive desire, is an impurity of the mind. Enmity, anger, rancor, hypocrisy, malice, jealousy, avarice, trickery, deceit, obduracy, haughtiness, pride, arrogance, inflation, indolence is an impurity of the mind. Bhikkhus, that bhikkhu who recognizes cupidity, excessive desire, as an impurity of the mind, abandons it. Who recognizes enmity, anger, rancor, hypocrisy, malice, jealousy, avarice, trickery, deceit, obduracy, haughtiness, pride, arrogance, inflation, indolence, as an impurity of the mind, abandons it. Bhikkhus, when that bhikkhu has abandoned cupidity, excessive desire, recognizing it as an impurity of the mind, when he has abandoned enmity, anger, rancor, hypocrisy, malice, jealousy, avarice, trickery, deceit, obduracy, haughtiness, pride, arrogance, inflation, indolence, recognizing it as an impurity of the mind, he finds serene joy, satisfaction in the Enlightened One, knowing that the Blessed One is worthy, perfectly enlightened, endowed with knowledge and virtue, happy, knower of worlds, matchless tamer of men, teacher of gods and men, awakened and blessed. He finds serene joy, satisfaction in the Dhamma, knowing that the Dhamma is excellently expounded by the Blessed One. It can be realized here in this life. It produces immediate results. It invites people to come and see, investigate. It leads to the goal, Nibbana. It has to be comprehended by the wise, each for himself. He finds serene joy, satisfaction, in the community of the disciples, knowing that the community of the disciples of the Blessed One is of good conduct, upright, wise, dutiful. The community of the disciples of the Blessed One, namely, the 4 pairs of persons, the 8 kinds of individuals, is worthy of offerings, of hospitality, of gifts, of reverential salutation. It is an incomparable field of merit to the world. Footnote. The 4 pairs of persons constitute 4 kinds of disciples who have attained the 4 paths and the 4 fruits of sainthood, namely Sotapatti, stream entrant, Sakadagami, once returner, Anagami, never returner, and Arahata, worthy. The one who has attained the path and the one who has attained the fruit of each of the 4 stages of sainthood are once taken together and considered as a pair. Hence the 4 pairs of persons. And then when the 2 persons of each pair are regarded separately, there are 8 individuals. End of footnote. Finally, with impurities renounced, spewed out, discharged, abandoned, and with the thought that he is endowed with serene joy in the Enlightened One, in his teaching, Dhamma, in the community. He is touched with a feeling for the sense and the truth, and he receives the gladness associated with truth. When one is glad, joy arises. When the mind is joyful, the body becomes relaxed. When relaxed, one feels content. The mind of the contented man is concentrated. A bhikkhu who has reached this state in virtue, in mental discipline, and in wisdom may, without impediment to his spiritual life, partake of the choicest rice with all manner of sauces and curries. Just as a soiled and dirty cloth, plunged in clear water, becomes pure and clean, or just as gold, passed through the furnace, becomes pure and clean. Even so, a bhikkhu who has reached this state in virtue, in mental discipline, and in wisdom, may partake of the choicest rice with all manner of sauces and curries, and it will not be an impediment, harm, to him and to his spiritual life. With thoughts of love, of compassion, sympathetic joy, of equanimity, he pervades one quarter of the world, so too the second, the third, and the fourth quarters, above, below, across, everywhere. The whole length and breadth of the wide world is pervaded by the radiant thoughts of a mind all-embracing, vast and boundless, without hate, without ill will. Then he knows, there is this, there is a lower, and there is yet a higher stage. Deliverance lies beyond this realm of perceptions. When he knows and sees this, his mind becomes liberated from the impurities of sense pleasure, of the desire for continuing existence, of ignorance. When liberated, there is knowledge that he is liberated. Then he knows birth is exhausted, the holy life has been lived, what has to be done is done, there is no more left to be done on this account. Bhikkhus, such a bhikkhu can be said to have bathed internally. Now at this time there was sitting close by the Brahmin, Sundarika Bharadvaja, who asked the Blessed One thus, "Does the Venerable Gautama go to bathe in the river Bahuka?" "What does the river Bahuka matter, Brahmin? What good does it do?" "Venerable Gautama, the river Bahuka is considered by many people as purifying, as holy. Many people wash away their sins in the river Bahuka." Thereupon, the Blessed One addressed the Brahmin Sundarika Bhavarajda in these lines. "In Bahuka and in Adhikaka, Gaya, Sundarika, Sratsati, Payaga, Bahumati, there the fool of black deeds may daily plunge, yet is never purified. What can Sundarika, Payaga, or Bahumati do? They cleanse not the man guilty of hate and evil. For him who is pure in mind, any day is auspicious, any day is hallowed. Cleansed, pure in deeds, he always fulfills observances. So, Brahmin, come and bathe here. Love all that lives. If you neither lie, nor slay, nor steal, are no greedy miser, but live in trust, what use going to Gaya? Your well home is at Gaya." At this, the Brahmin Sundarika Bharadjava said to the Blessed One, "Excellent, Venerable Gautama, excellent. It is just as if one should set upright what had been turned upside down, or reveal what had been hidden away, or show the way to a man gone astray, or bring a lamp into darkness so that those with eyes might see things there. In this manner, in many ways, the Dhamma is expounded by the Venerable Gautama. I take refuge in the Venerable Gautama, in the Dhamma, and in the community of bhikkhus. May I be admitted into the order and receive the higher ordination under the Venerable Gautama. The Brahmin Sundarika Bharajava was admitted into the order and received the higher ordination. Not long after his higher ordination, the Venerable Bharajava, dwelling alone and aloof, strenuous, ardent, resolute, attained to and dwelt in that incomparable state, the ultimate aim of holy life, in quest of which sons of families go forth from home to homelessness. And he knew through higher knowledge, birth is exhausted, the holy life has been lived. What has to be done is done, there is no more left to be done on this account. And in this way, the Venerable Bharajava, too, became one of the Arahants. Majjhima Nikaya, Sutta number 7. End of section. What the Buddha Taught by Walpola Rahula. Section. The Foundations of Mindfulness, the Presence of Mindfulness. Satipatthana Sutta, abridged. Thus have I heard. The Blessed One was once living among the Kurus at Kama Sadama, a market town of the Kuru people. There the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus and spoke as follows. This is the only way, bhikkhus, for the purification of beings, for the overcoming of sorrow and lamentation, for the destruction of suffering and grief, for reaching the right path, for the attainment of nibbana, namely the 4 foundations, 4 forms of presence, of mindfulness. What are the 4? Here, a bhikkhu, ardent, clearly comprehending things, and mindful, lives observing the activities of the body, having overcome covetousness and repugnance towards the world of the body, observing feelings and having overcome covetousness and repugnance towards the world of feelings, observing the activities of the mind, having overcome covetousness and repugnance towards the world of the mind, observing mental objects, having overcome covetousness and repugnance towards the world of mental objects. Section. Body. And how does a bhikkhu live observing the activities of the body? 1. Breathing. Here, bhikkhus, a bhikkhu having gone to the forest, to the foot of a tree or to some empty place, sits down, with his legs crossed, keeps his body straight and his mindfulness alert. Ever mindful, he breathes in, and ever mindful, he breathes out. Breathing in a long breath, he knows, I am breathing in a long breath. Breathing out a long breath, he knows, I am breathing out a long breath. Breathing in a short breath, he knows, I am breathing in a short breath. Breathing out a short breath, he knows, I am breathing out a short breath. Experiencing the whole breath body, I shall breathe in. Thus he trains himself. Experiencing the whole breath body, I shall breathe out. Thus he trains himself. Calming the activity of the breath body, I shall breathe in. Thus he trains himself. Calming the activity of the breath body, I shall breathe out. Thus he trains himself. Thus he lives observing the activities of the body internally, or externally, or both internally and externally. He lives also observing origination factors in the body, or dissolution factors in the body, or origination and dissolution factors in the body. Or his mindfulness is established to the extent necessary just for knowledge and awareness that the body exists, and he lives unattached and clings to naught in the world. In this way, a bhikkhu lives observing the activities of the body. 2. Postures of the body. And further, bhikkhus, a bhikkhu knows when he is going, I am going. He knows when he is standing, I am standing. He knows when he is sitting, I am sitting. He knows when he is lying down, I am lying down. Or he knows just how his body is disposed. Thus he lives observing the activities of the body internally or externally. 3. Full attention. And further, bhikkhus, a bhikkhu applies full attention, either in going forward or back, in looking straight on or looking away, in bending or in stretching, in wearing robes or carrying the bowl, in eating, drinking, chewing, or savoring, in attending to the calls of nature, in walking, in standing, in sitting, in falling asleep, in waking, in speaking or in keeping silence. In all these he applies full attention. Thus he lives observing the activities of the body. Four, repulsiveness of the body. And further, bhikkhus, a bhikkhu reflects on this very body enveloped by the skin and full of manifold impurity, from the soul up, and from the top of the hair down, thinking thus: there are in this body hair of the head, hair of the body, nails, teeth, skin, flesh, sinews, bones, marrow, kidneys, heart, liver, midriff, spleen, lungs, intestines, mesentery, stomach, fasces, bile, phlegm, pus, blood, sweat, fat, tears, grease, saliva, navel mucus, synovial fluid, urine. Just as if there were a double-mouthed provision bag full of various kinds of grain, such as hill paddy, green gram, cowpeas, sesamum, and husked rice, and a man with sound eyes, having opened that bag, were to reflect thus: this is a hill paddy, this is a paddy, this is a green gram, this is a cowpea, this is sesamum, this is husked rice. Just so, bhikkhus, a bhikkhu reflects on this very body, enveloped by the skin and full of manifold impurity, from the soul up, and from the top of the hair down, thinking thus: there are in this body of hair of the head, hair of the body, nails, teeth, ... synovial fluid, urine. Thus he lives observing the body, ... 5. Material elements. And further, bhikkhus, a bhikkhu reflects on this very body, as it is, and as it is constituted, by way of the material elements. There are in this body the element of earth, the element of water, the element of fire, the element of wind. Just as if, bhikkhus, a clever cow butcher or his apprentice, having slaughtered a cow and divided it into portions, would be sitting at the juncture of 4 high roads. In this same way, a bhikkhu reflects on this very body, as it is, and as it is constituted by way of the material elements. There are in this body the elements of earth, water, fire, and wind. Thus he lives observing the body, ... 6. The 9 cemetery objects. And further, bhikkhus, just as a bhikkhu sees a body dead 1, 2, or 3 days, swollen, blue, and festering, thrown onto the cemetery, so he applies this perception to his own body thus: verily, my own body too is of the same nature. Such it will become and will not escape it. Thus he lives observing the body. 2. And further, bhikkhus, just as a bhikkhu sees a body thrown onto the cemetery, being eaten by crows, hawks, vultures, dogs, jackals, or by different kinds of worms. So he applies this perception to his own body thus. Verily, my own body too is of the same nature. Such it will become, and will not escape it. Thus he lives observing the body. 3. And further, bhikkhus, just as a bhikkhu sees a body thrown onto the cemetery, reduced to a skeleton, with some flesh and blood attached to it, held together by the tendons. 4. And further, bhikkhus, just as a bhikkhu sees a body thrown onto the cemetery, reduced to a skeleton, blood besmeared and without flesh, held together by the tendons. 5. And further, bhikkhus, just as a bhikkhu sees a body thrown onto the cemetery, reduced to a skeleton, without flesh and blood, held together by the tendons. 6. And further, bhikkhus, just as a bhikkhu sees a body thrown onto the cemetery, reduced to disconnected bones, scattered in all directions. Here a bone of the hand, there a bone of the foot, a shin bone, a thigh bone, the pelvis, spine, and skull. 7. And further, bhikkhus, just as a bhikkhu sees a body thrown onto the cemetery completely reduced to bleached bones of conch-like color. 8. And further, bhikkhus, just as a bhikkhu sees a body thrown onto the cemetery, reduced to bones, more than a year old, lying in a heap. 9. And further, bhikkhus, just as a bhikkhu sees a body thrown onto the cemetery, reduced to bones rotten and become dust. So he applies this perception to his own body thus. Verily, my own body too is of the same nature. Such it will become and will not escape it. Thus he lives observing the body. Section 2. Feelings. And how, bhikkhus, does a bhikkhu live observing feelings? Here, bhikkhus, a bhikkhu, when experiencing a pleasant feeling, knows, I experience a pleasant feeling. When experiencing a painful feeling, he knows, I experience a painful feeling. When experiencing a neither pleasant nor painful feeling, he knows, I experience a neither pleasant nor painful feeling. When experiencing a pleasant worldly feeling, he knows, I experience a pleasant worldly feeling. When experiencing a pleasant spiritual feeling, he knows, I experience a pleasant spiritual feeling. When experiencing a painful worldly feeling, he knows, I experience a painful worldly feeling. When experiencing a painful spiritual feeling, he knows, I experience a painful spiritual feeling. When experiencing a neither pleasant nor painful worldly feeling, he knows, I experience a neither pleasant nor painful worldly feeling. When experiencing a neither pleasant nor painful spiritual feeling, he knows, I experience a neither pleasant nor painful spiritual feeling. He lives in this way observing feelings internally, or externally, or internally and externally. He lives observing origination factors in feelings, or dissolution factors in feelings, or origination and dissolution factors in feelings. Or his mindfulness is established to the extent necessary, just for knowledge and awareness that feeling exists, and he lives unattached and clings to naught in the world. In this way, bhikkhus, a bhikkhu lives observed feelings. 3. Mind. And how, bhikkhus, does a bhikkhu live observing mind? Without ignorance. The mind without ignorance as being without ignorance. The shrunken state of mind as the shrunken state. The distracted state of mind as the distracted state. the developed state of mind as the developed state, the undeveloped state of mind as the undeveloped state, the state of mind with some other mental state superior to it as being the state with something mentally superior to it, the state of mind with no other mental state superior to it as being the state with nothing mentally superior to it, the concentrated state of mind as the concentrated state, the unconcentrated state of mind as the unconcentrated state, the liberated state of mind as the liberated state, and the unliberated state of mind as the unliberated state. He lives in this way, observing the mind internally or internally and externally. He lives observing origination factors in mind, or dissolution factors in mind, or origination and dissolution factors in mind. Or his mindfulness is established to the extent necessary, just for knowledge and awareness that mind exists, and he lives unattached and clings to naught in the world. Thus a bhikkhu lives observing the mind. Section 4. Mental Objects. And how bhikkhus does a bhikkhu live observing mental objects? 5 hindrances. Here, bhikkhus, a bhikkhu lives observing the 5 hindrances as mental objects. How, bhikkhus, does a bhikkhu live observing the 5 mental objects as hindrances as mental objects? 1. Here, bhikkhus, when sense desire is present, a bhikkhu knows, sense desire is in me. Or when sense desire is not present, he knows there is no sense desire in me. He knows how the non-arisen sense desire arises. He knows how the arisen sense desire disappears. He knows how the non-arising in the future of the abandoned sense desire comes to be. 2. When anger is present, he knows anger is in me. 3. When torpor and languor are present, he knows torpor and languor are in me. 4. When restlessness and worry are present, he knows restlessness and worry are in me. 5. When doubt is present, he knows doubt is in me. Or when doubt is not present, he knows there is no doubt in me. He knows how the non-arisen doubt arises. He knows how the arisen doubt disappears. And he knows how the non-arising in the future of the abandoned doubt comes to be. In this way, he lives observing mental objects internally or externally, or internally and externally. He lives observing origination factors in mental objects, or dissolution factors in mental objects, or origination and dissolution factors in mental objects. Or his mindfulness is established to the extent necessary just for knowledge and awareness that mental objects exist, and he lives unattached and clings to naught in the world. In this way, bhikkhus, a bhikkhu lives observing the 5 hindrances as mental objects. 5 aggregates. And further, bhikkhus, a bhikkhu lives observing the 5 aggregates of clinging as mental objects. How, bhikkhus, does a bhikkhu live observing, contemplating the 5 aggregates of clinging as mental objects? Here, bhikkhus, a bhikkhu thinks, this is material form. It arises in this way, and it disappears in this way. This is feeling. It arises in this way, and it disappears in this way. This is perception. It arises in this way, and it disappears in this way. This is mental formations. They arise in this way, and they disappear in this way. This is consciousness. It arises in this way, and it disappears in this way. Thus he lives contemplating mental objects internally, etc. In this way, bhikkhus, a bhikkhu lives contemplating the 5 aggregates of clinging as mental objects. The 6 sense bases. And further, bhikkhus, a bhikkhu lives contemplating the 6 internal and 6 external sense bases as mental objects. How bhikkhus does a bhikkhu live contemplating the 6 internal and the 6 external sense bases as mental objects? Here, bhikkhus, a bhikkhu knows the eye and visual forms, and the fetter that arises dependent on both, the eye and forms. He knows how the non-arisen fetter arises. He knows how the arisen fetter disappears. And he knows how the non-arising and the future of the abandoned fetter comes to be. He knows the ear and sounds, the nose and smells, the tongue and flavors, the body and tangible objects, the mind and mental objects, and the fetter that arises dependent on both. He knows how the non-arisen fetter arises. He knows how the arisen fetter disappears. And he knows how the non-arising and the future of the abandoned fetter comes to be. In this way, bhikkhus, a bhikkhu lives contemplating mental objects internally, etc. In this way, bhikkhus, a bhikkhu lives contemplating the 6 internal and 6 external bases as mental objects. The 7 factors of enlightenment. And further, bhikkhus, a bhikkhu lives observing the 7 factors of enlightenment as mental objects. How, bhikkhus, does a bhikkhu live observing the 7 factors of enlightenment as mental objects? 1. Here, bhikkhus, when the enlightenment factor of mindfulness is present, the bhikkhu knows the enlightenment factor of mindfulness is in me. Or when the enlightenment factor of mindfulness is absent, he knows the enlightenment factor of mindfulness is not in me. And he knows how the non-arisen enlightenment factor of mindfulness arises, and how perfection in the development of the arisen enlightenment factor of mindfulness comes to be. 2. When the enlightenment factor of the investigation of mental objects is present, the bhikkhu knows the enlightenment factor of the investigation of mental objects is in me. When the enlightenment factor of the investigation of mental objects is absent, he knows, etc. 3. When the enlightenment factor of energy is present, he knows the enlightenment factor of energy is in me. When the enlightenment factor of energy is absent, he knows the enlightenment factor of energy is not in me. And he knows how the non-arisen enlightenment factor of energy arises, and how perfection in the development of the arisen enlightenment factor of energy comes to be. 4. When the enlightenment factor of joy is present, he knows, etc. 5. When the enlightenment factor of relaxation is present, he knows, etc. 6. When the enlightenment factor of concentration is present, he knows, etc. 7. When the enlightenment factor of equanimity is present, he knows, etc. Thus he lives, observing mental objects internally, etc. Thus, bhikkhus, a bhikkhu lives, observing the 7 factors of enlightenment as mental objects. The 4 Noble Truths. And further, bhikkhus, a bhikkhu lives contemplating the 4 Noble Truths as mental objects. How, bhikkhus, does a bhikkhu live contemplating the 4 Noble Truths as mental objects? Here, bhikkhus, a bhikkhu knows. This is dukkha, suffering. According to reality, he knows. This is the origin of dukkha. According to reality, he knows this is the cessation of dukkha. According to reality, he knows this is the path leading to the cessation of dukkha. According to reality. Thus he lives contemplating mental objects internally, etc. In this way, bhikkhus, a bhikkhu lives contemplating the 4 Noble Truths as mental objects. Bhikkhus, whosoever practices these four foundations of mindfulness in this manner for 7 years, then one of these two fruits may be expected by him: highest knowledge, arahantship, here and now, or if some remainder of clinging is yet present, the state of non-returning. Bhikkhus, let alone 7 years. Should any person practice these four foundations of mindfulness in this matter for 6 years, 5 years, 4, 3, 2, 1 year, then one of these two fruits may be expected by him: highest knowledge, here and now, or if some remainder of clinging is yet present, the state of non-returning. Bhikkhus, let alone a year. Should anyone practice these four foundations of mindfulness in this matter for 7 months, 6 months, 5, 4, 3, 2, a month, half a month, then one of these two fruits may be expected by him: highest knowledge, here and now, or if some remainder of clinging is yet present, the state of non-returning. Bhikkhus, let alone half a month. Should any person practice these four foundations of mindfulness in this manner for a week, then one of these two fruits may be expected by him: highest knowledge, here and now, or if some remainder of clinging is yet present, the state of non-returning. Because of this, it was said, "This is the only way, bhikkhus, for the purification of beings, for the overcoming of sorrow and lamentation, for the destruction of suffering and grief, for reaching the right path, for the attainment of nibbana, namely the four foundations of mindfulness." This the Blessed One said. Satisfied, the bhikkhus rejoiced at his words. From the Majjhima Nikaya, Sutta number 10. What the Buddha Taught, by Walpola Raula. Section. Advice to Sigala, Domestic and Social Relations. Sigalovada Sutta, abridged. Thus have I heard. The Blessed One was once staying near Rajagaha, at the squirrel's feeding ground in the bamboo wood. Now at this time Sigala, a householder's son, rising early, went out of Rajagaha. With wet hair, wet garments, and his clasped hands uplifted, he performed the rite of worship to the several quarters of the earth and sky, to the east, south, west, and north, and to the nadir and the zenith. Footnote. Performing the rite of worship of the different quarters of the external world, invoking for protection the mighty spirits or gods inhabiting them, was an old ritual according to the Vedic tradition. The Buddha, who disapproves and condemns such superstitious old practices, gives them new meanings and interpretations according to the persons to whom he speaks. See the parable of the piece of cloth, where he speaks to a Brahmin of the inner bath instead of the sacred baths of the holy river. End of footnote. Early that same morning, the Blessed One dressed, took bowl and robe, and entered Rajagaha seeking alms. He saw Sigala at his rite of worship, and spoke to him thus. Why, young householder, do you, rising early and leaving Rajagaha, with your hair and raiment wet, worship the several quarters of sky and earth? Sir, my father, when he was on his deathbed, said to me, Dear son, you should worship the quarters of earth and sky. So I, sir, honoring my father's word, reverencing, revering, holding it sacred, rising early and leaving Rajagaha, worship in this way. But in the disciple of the Arya, noble one, young householder, the 6 quarters should not be worshipped in this way. Reply. How then, sir, in the disciple of the Arya, should the 6 quarters be worshipped? It would be an excellent thing if the Blessed One would so teach me the way in which, according to the disciple of the Arya, the 6 quarters should be worshipped. Here then, young householder, reflect carefully, and I will tell you. Yes, sir, responded young Sagala. And the Blessed One said, just as, young householder, the Aryan disciple has put away the 4 vices in conduct, just as he does no evil actions from the 4 motives, just as he does not make towards the 6 doors of dissipating wealth, avoiding these 14 evil things, he is a guardian of the 6 quarters, is on his way to conquer both worlds, is successful both in this world and in the next. At the dissolution of the body, after death, he is reborn to a happy destiny in heaven. What are the 4 vices of conduct that he has put away? The destruction of life, stealing, adultery, and lying. These are the 4 vices of conduct that he has put away. By which 4 motives does he do no evil actions? Evil actions are done from motives of partiality, enmity, stupidity, and fear. But as the Aryan disciple is not led away by these motives, he does no evil action through them. And which are the 6 doors of dissipating wealth? Drink, frequenting the streets at unseemly hours, haunting fairs, gambling, associating with evil friends, idleness. There are, young householder, these 6 dangers of drink: the actual loss of wealth, increase of quarrels, susceptibility to disease, an evil reputation, indecent exposure, ruining one's intelligence. 6, young householder, are the perils a man runs through frequenting the streets at unseemly hours. He himself is unguarded or unprotected, and so too are his wife and children. So also is his property, wealth. In addition, he falls under the suspicion of being responsible for undetected crimes. False rumors are attached to his name. He goes out to meet many troubles. There are 6 perils in haunting fairs. A man keeps looking about to see where there is dancing, where is there singing, music, recitation, cymbal playing, the beating of tom-toms. 6, young householder, are the perils of gambling. If the man wins, he is hated. If he loses, he mourns his lost wealth. Waste of wealth. His word has no weight in an assembly, a court of law. He is despised by his friends and companions. He is not sought in marriage, for people will say that a man who is a gambler will never make a good husband. There are 6 perils of associating with evil friends. Any gambler, any libertine, any tippler, any cheat, any swindler, any man of violence becomes his friend and companion. There are 6 perils in idleness. A man says it is too cold and does no work. He says it is too hot and does no work. He says it is too early, too late, and does no work. He says, I am too hungry, and does no work, too full, and does no work. And while all that he should do remains undone, he makes no money, and such wealth as he has dwindles away. Four persons should be reckoned as foes in the likeness of friends: the rapacious person, the man who pays lip service only to the friend, the flatterer, the wastrel. Of these, the first is to be reckoned as a foe in the likeness of a friend on 4 grounds. He is rapacious. He gives little and expects much. He does what he has to out of fear. He pursues his own interests. On 4 grounds, the man who pays lip service only to a friend is to be reckoned as a foe in the likeness of a friend. He makes friendly professions as regards the past. He makes friendly professions as regards the future. The only service he renders is by his empty sayings. When the opportunity for service arises, he shows his unreliability. On 4 grounds, the flatterer is to be reckoned as a foe in the likeness of a friend. He approves your bad deeds as well as your good deeds. He praises you to your face, and in your absence he speaks ill of you. On 4 grounds, the wastrel is to be reckoned as a foe in the likeness of a friend. He is your companion when you go drinking, when you frequent the streets at untimely hours, when you haunt shows and fairs, when you gamble. The friends who should be reckoned as good-hearted friends are 4. The helper, the friend who is in constant happiness in adversity, the friend of good counsel, the sympathetic friend. The friend who is a helper is to be reckoned as good-hearted on 4 grounds. He protects you when you are taken unawares. He protects your property when you are not there to protect it. He is a refuge to you when you are afraid. When you have tasks to perform, he provides twice as much help as you may need. The friend who is constant in happiness and adversity is to be reckoned as good-hearted on 4 grounds. He tells you his secrets. He does not betray your secrets. In your troubles, he does not forsake you. For your sake, he will even lay down his life. The friend of good counsel is good-hearted on 4 grounds. He restrains you from doing wrong. He enjoins you to do what is right. From him you learn what you had not learnt before. He shows you the way to heaven. The friend who is sympathetic is to be reckoned as good-hearted on 4 grounds. He does not rejoice over your misfortunes. He rejoices with you in your prosperity. He restrains those who speak ill of you. He commends those who speak well of you. And how, young householder, does the Aryan disciple protect, guard the 6 quarters? Footnote. Now the Buddha explains to Sigala what the 6 quarters are and how to worship them, according to the disciple of the Arya, noble one, by way of performing one's duties and obligations towards them, instead of performing the ritual worship according to the old Brahmanic tradition. If the 6 quarters are protected in this way, they are made safe and secure, and no danger would come from there. Brahmins, too, worshipped the quarters of the external world to prevent any danger coming from the spirits or gods inhabiting them. End of footnote. The following should be looked upon as the 6 quarters. Parents as the east, teachers as the south, wife and children as the west, friends and companions as the north, servants and employees as the nadir, recluses and Brahmins, the religieux, as the zenith. The child should minister to his parents as the eastern quarter in 5 ways, saying to himself, "Once I was supported by them, now I will be their support. I will perform those duties they have to perform. I will maintain the lineage and tradition of my family. I will look after my inheritance. And I will give alms, perform religious rites, on behalf of them when they are dead." Parents thus ministered to by their children as the eastern quarter show their love for them in the 5 ways. They restrain them from evil. They direct them towards the good. They train them to a profession. They arrange suitable marriages for them. And in due time they hand over the inheritance to them. In this way, the eastern quarter is protected and made safe and secure for him. A pupil should minister to his teachers as the southern quarter in 5 ways: by rising from his seat to salute them, by waiting upon them, by his eagerness to learn, by personal service, and by respectfully accepting their teaching. Teachers, thus ministered to as the southern quarter by their pupil, show their love for their pupil in 5 ways. They train him well, they make him grasp what he has learnt, they instruct him thoroughly in the lore of every art, they introduce him to their friends and companions, they provide for his security everywhere. In this way, the southern quarter is protected and made safe and secure for him. A wife, as western quarter, should be ministered to by her husband in 5 ways: by respecting her, by his courtesy, by being faithful to her, by handing over authority to her, by providing her with adornment, jewelry, etc. The wife, ministered to by her husband as the western quarter, loves him in these 5 ways: by doing her duty well, by hospitality to attendants, etc., by her fidelity, by looking after his earnings, and by skill and industry in all her business dealings. In this way, the western quarter is protected and made safe and secure for him. In 5 ways, a member of a family should minister to his friends and companions as the northern quarter: by generosity, by courtesy, by benevolence, by equality, treating them as he treats himself, and by being true to his word. Thus ministered to as the northern quarter, his friends and companions love him in these 5 ways. They protect him when he is in need of protection. They look after his property when he is unable to. They become a refuge in danger. They do not forsake him in his troubles. And they respect even others related to him. In this way, the northern quarter is protected and made safe and secure for him. A master ministers to his servants and employees as the nadir in 5 ways: by assigning them work according to their capacity and strength, by supplying them with food and wages, by tending them in sickness, by sharing with them unusual delicacies, and by giving them leave and gifts at suitable times. In these ways, ministered to by their master, servants and employees love their master in 5 ways. They wake up before him, they go to bed after him, they take what is given to them, they do their work well, and they speak well of him and give him a good reputation. In this way, the nadir, protected and made safe and secure for him. A member of a family, a layman, should minister to recluses and Brahmins, the religieux, as the zenith in 5 ways: by affectionate acts, by affectionate words, by affectionate thoughts, by keeping open house for them, by supplying them with their worldly needs. In this way, ministered to as the zenith, recluses and Brahmins show their love for the members of the family, laymen, in 6 ways. They keep them from evil, they exhort them to do good, they love them with kindly thoughts, they teach them what they have learnt, they teach them what they have not learnt, they correct and refine what they have learnt, they reveal to them the way to heaven. In this way is the zenith protected and made safe and secure for him. When the Blessed One had thus spoken, Sigala the young householder said this, "Excellent, sir, excellent. It is as if one should set upright what had been turned upside down, or reveal what had been hidden away, or show the way to a man gone astray, or bring a lamp into darkness, so that those with eyes might see things there." In this manner the Dhamma is expounded by the Blessed One in many ways, and I take refuge in the Blessed One, in the Dhamma, and in the community of bhikkhus. May the Blessed One receive me as his lay disciple, as one who has taken his refuge in him from this day forth, as long as life endures. From the Digha Nikaya, number 31. End of section. What the Buddha Taught by Walpola Raula. Section. The Words of Truth. Selections from the Dhammapada. The verse numbers will be given here before the phrases. Number 1. All mental states have mind as their forerunner. Mind is their chief, and they are mind-made. If one speaks or acts with a defiled mind, then suffering follows one, even as the wheel follows the hoof of the draught ox. Verse 2. All mental states have mind as their forerunner. Mind is their chief, and they are mind-made. If one speaks or acts with a pure mind, happiness follows one as one's shadow that does not leave one. Verse 3. He abused me, he beat me, he defeated me, he robbed me. The hatred of those who harbor such thoughts is not appeased. Verse 5. Hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world. It is appeased by love. This is an eternal law. Verse 24. Whosoever is energetic, mindful, pure in conduct, discriminating, self-restrained, right living, vigilant, his fame steadily increases. Verse 25. By endeavor, diligence, discipline, and self-mastery, let the wise man make of himself an island that no flood can overwhelm. Verse 26. Fools, men of little intelligence, give themselves over to negligence, but the wise man protects his diligence as a supreme treasure. 27. Give not yourselves unto negligence. Have no intimacy with sense pleasures. The man who meditates with diligence attains much happiness. 33. This fickle, unsteady mind, difficult to guard, difficult to control, the wise man makes straight, as the Fletcher the arrow. 35. Hard to restrain, unstable is this mind. It flits wherever it lists. Good it is to control the mind. A controlled mind brings happiness. 38. He whose mind is unsteady, he who knows not the good teaching, he whose confidence wavers, the wisdom of such a person does not attain fullness. 42. Whatever harm a foe may do to a foe, or a hater to another hater, a wrongly directed mind may do one harm far exceeding these. 43. Neither mother, nor father, nor any other relative can do a man such good as is wrought by a rightly directed mind. 47. The man who gathers only the flowers of sense pleasures, whose mind is entangled, Death carries him away as a great flood in a sleeping village. 50. One should not pry into the faults of others, into things done and left undone by others. One should rather consider what by oneself is done and left undone. 51. As a beautiful flower that is full of hue, but lacks fragrance, even so fruitless is the well-spoken word of one who does not practice it. 61. If, as one fares, one does not find a companion who is better or equal, let one resolutely pursue the solitary course. There can be no fellowship with the fool. 62. I have sons, I have wealth. Thinking thus, the fool is troubled. Indeed, he himself is not his own. How can his sons or wealth be his? 64. Even if all his life a fool associates with a wise man, he will not understand the truth, even as the spoon does not understand the flavor of the soup. 67. That deed is not well done, which one regrets when it is done, and the result of which one experiences weeping with a tearful face. 69. The fool thinks an evil deed as sweet as honey, so long as it does not ripen, does not produce results. But when it ripens, the fool comes to grief. 81. Even as a solid rock is unshaken by the wind, so are the wise unshaken by praise or blame. 127. Oh, my apologies. 82. Even as a lake, deep, extremely clear and tranquil, so do the wise become tranquil, having heard the teaching. 85. Few among men are they who cross to the further shore. The others merely run up and down the bank on this side. 90. For him who has completed the journey, who is sorrowless, wholly set free, and rid of all bonds, for such a one there is no burning of the passions. 94. He whose senses are mastered like horses, well under the charioteer's control. He who is purged of pride, free from passions, such a steadfast one, even the gods envy, hold dear. 96. Calm is the thought, calm the word and deed of him who, rightly knowing, is wholly freed, perfectly peaceful and equipoised. 97. The man who is not credulous, who knows the, quote, uncreated, who has severed all ties, who has put an end to the occasion of good and evil, who has vomited all desires, verily he is supreme among men. 103. One may conquer in a battle 1,000 times 1,000 men, yet he is the best of conquerors who conquers himself. 104-5. Better it is truly to conquer oneself than to conquer angels. Neither a god, nor an angel, nor Mara, nor Brahma could turn this into defeat, the victory of a person such as this, who is self-mastered and ever restrained in conduct. 111. Though one may live 100 years with no true insight and self-control, yet better indeed is the life of one day for a man who meditates in wisdom. 116. Make haste in doing good. Restrain your mind from evil. Whosoever is slow in doing good, his mind delights in evil. 119. It is well within the evildoer until his evil deed ripens. But when his evil deed bears fruit, he then sees its ill effects. 120. It is ill, perhaps, with the doer of good until his good deed ripens, but when it bears fruit, then he sees the happy results. 121. Do not think lightly of evil, saying, "It will not come to me." Even a water pot is filled by the falling of drops. Likewise the fool, gathering it drop by drop, fills himself with evil. 122. Do not think lightly of good, saying, "It will not come to me." Even as a water pot is filled by the falling of drops, so the wise man, gathering it drop by drop, fills himself with good. 125. Whosoever offends an innocent person, pure and guiltless, his evil comes back on that fool himself like fine dust thrown against the wind. 129. All tremble at weapons, all fear death. Comparing others with oneself, one should not slay nor cause to slay. 131. He who, seeking his own happiness, torments with the rod creatures that are desirous of happiness, shall not obtain happiness hereafter. 152. The man of little learning, ignorant, grows like a bull. His flesh grows, but not his wisdom. 155. Not having lived the holy life, not having obtained wealth in their youth, men pine away like old herons in a lake without fish. 159. If a man practices himself what he admonishes others to do, he himself, being well controlled, will have control over others. It is difficult, indeed, to control oneself. 160. Oneself is one's own protector, refuge. What other protector, refuge, can there be? With oneself fully controlled, one obtains a protection, refuge, which is hard to gain. 165. By oneself, indeed, is evil done, and by oneself is one defiled. By oneself is evil left undone, and by oneself, indeed, is one purified. Purity and impurity depend on oneself. No one can purify another. 167. Do not follow mean things. Do not dwell in negligence. Do not embrace false views. So the world, i.e. samsara, the cycle of existence and continuity, is not prolonged. 171. Come, behold this world, how it resembles an ornamented royal chariot, in which fools flounder, but for the wise there is no attachment to it. 178. Better is the gain of entering the stream than sole sovereignty over the earth, then going to heaven, then rule supreme over the entire universe. 183. Not to do any evil, to cultivate good, to purify one's mind. This is the teaching of the Buddhas. 184. The most excellent ascetic practice is patience and forbearance. Nibbana is supreme, said the Buddhas. He indeed is no recluse who harms another, nor is he an ascetic who hurts others. 185. To speak no ill, to do no harm, to practice restraint according to the fundamental precepts, to be moderate in eating, to live in seclusion, to devote oneself to higher consciousness. This is the teaching of the Buddhas. 197. Happy indeed we live without hate among the hateful. We live free from hatred amidst hateful men. 201. The conqueror begets enmity. The defeated lie down in distress. The peaceful rest in happiness, giving up both victory and defeat. 204. Health is the best gain. Contentment is the best wealth. A trusty friend is the best kinsman. Nibbana is the supreme bliss. 205. Having tasted of the flavor of solitude and tranquility, one becomes woeless and stainless, drinking the essence of the joy of truth. 215. From lust arises grief. From lust arises fear. For him who is free from lust there is no grief, much less fear. 222. He who holds back arisen anger, as one checks a whirling chariot, him I call a charioteer. Other folk only hold the reins. 223. Conquer anger by love, evil by good. Conquer the miser with liberality, and the liar with truth. 231. Be on your guard against physical agitation. Be controlled in body. Forsaking bodily misconduct, follow right conduct in body. 232. Be on your guard against verbal agitation. Be controlled in words. Forsaking wrong speech, follow right ways in words. 233. Be on your guard against mental agitation. Be controlled in thoughts. Forsaking evil thoughts, follow right ways in thoughts. 234. The wise are controlled in deed, controlled in words, controlled in thoughts. Verily, they are fully controlled. 239. By degrees, little by little, from moment to moment, a wise man removes his own impurities, as a smith removes the dross of silver. 240. As rust, arisen out of iron, eats itself away, even so his own deeds lead the transgressor to the states of woe. 248. Know this, O good man, that evil things are uncontrollable. Let not greed and wickedness drag you to suffering for a long time. 251. There is no fire like lust. There is no grip like hate. There is no net like delusion. There is no river like craving. 252. The fault of others is easily seen, but one's own is hard to see. Like chaff one winnows others' thoughts, but one's own one conceals as a crafty fowler disguises himself. 267. He who has transcended both merit, good, and demerit, evil. He who leads a pure life. He who lives with understanding in this world. He indeed is called a bhikkhu. 268/269. Not by silence does one become a sage, if one be foolish and untaught. But the wise man who, as if holding a pair of scales, takes what is good and leaves out what is evil, is indeed a sage. For that reason he is called a sage. He who understands both sides in this world is called a sage. 273. Of paths, the Noble Eightfold Path is the best. Of truths, the four words, noble truths. Detachment is the best of states, and of bipeds the seeing ones, the man of vision. 274. This is the only way. There is no other for the purification of vision. Follow this way. This is the bewilderment of Mara, evil. 275. Following this way, ye shall make an end of suffering. This verily is the way, declared by me when I had learnt to remove the arrow, suffering. 276. You yourselves should make the effort. The awakened ones are only teachers. Those who enter this path, and who are meditative, are delivered from the bonds of Mara, evil. 277. All conditioned things are impermanent. When one sees this in wisdom, then one becomes dispassionate towards the painful. This is the path to purity. 278. All conditioned things are dukkha, ill. When one sees this in wisdom, then he becomes dispassionate towards the painful. This is the path to purity. 279. All states, Dhamma, are without self. When one sees this in wisdom, then he becomes dispassionate towards the painful. This is the path to purity. 280. Who strives not when he should strive, who, though young and strong, is given to idleness, who is loose in his purpose and thoughts, and who is lazy, that idler never finds the way to wisdom. 281. Watchful of speech, well restrained in mind, let him do no evil with the body. Let him purify these three ways of action, and attain the path made known by the sages. 334. The craving of the man addicted to careless living grows like a maluva creeper. He jumps hither and thither, like a monkey in the forest looking for fruit. 335. Whosoever in this world is overcome by this wretched clinging thirst, his sorrows grow like the birana grass after rain. 336. But whosoever in this world overcomes this wretched craving, so difficult to overcome, his sorrow falls away from him like water drops from a lotus leaf. 338. As a tree cut down sprouts forth again if its roots remain uninjured and strong, even so, when the propensity to craving is not destroyed, this suffering arises again and again. 343. Led by craving, men run this way and that, like an ensnared hare. Therefore, let the bhikkhu, who wishes his detachment, discard craving. 348. Free thyself from the past, free thyself from the future, free thyself from the present. Crossing to the farther shore of existence, with the mind released everywhere, no more shalt thou come to birth and decay. 360. Good is restraint of the eye, good is restraint of the ear, good is restraint of the nose, good is restraint of the tongue. 361. Good is restraint of the body, good is restraint of speech, good is restraint of the mind. Restraint everywhere is good. The bhikkhu restrained in every way is freed from all suffering. 362. He who is controlled in hand, controlled in foot, controlled in speech, and possessing the highest control of mind, delighted within, composed, solitary, and contented, him they call a bhikkhu. 365. One should not despise what one receives, and one should not envy the gain of others. The bhikkhu who envies others does not attain concentration. 367. He who has no attachment whatsoever to name and form, mind and body, and he who does not grieve over what there is not, he indeed is called a bhikkhu. 368. The bhikkhu, who abides in loving kindness, who is delighted in the teaching of the Buddha, attains the state of calm, the happiness of stilling the conditioned things. 385. He for whom there exists neither this shore nor the other, nor both, he who is undistressed and unbound, him I call a Brahman. 387. The sun glows by day, the moon shines by night. In his armor the warrior glows. In meditation shines the Brahman, but all day and night shines with radiance the awakened one. 420. He whose destiny neither the gods nor demigods nor men do know. He who has destroyed defilements and become worthy, him I call a Brahman. 423. He who knows former lives, who sees heaven and hell, who has reached the end of births and attained to super-knowledge, the sage, accomplished with all accomplishments, him I call a Brahman. End of selected sayings from